Brian, you are very much associated with a black 993 GTR. That car is still around in your garage at the bottom. Uh, I remember you driving at many events with that car. Tell us a little bit about the story. I think there was a version 1 and a version 2 also.
Yeah, sorry you brought that up. No, version 1, you were not allowed to buy. It was a cup car. It was a factory-built cup car, which was raced in the series. And you were not allowed to buy one unless you or somebody had entered it in the full series for that year. So when I got interested in one, you had to follow all of the races to see who had had an accident and who hadn't, and whose car was still in pristine condition. So I managed to get one of those and brought it out, and I started campaigning with that. And in the quest for more power, of course, you put in a set of better camshafts. The car, as supplied by the factory and entered in the races, you were not allowed to touch the cams. You were not allowed to touch the injectors. You weren't allowed to touch the computer. That was all sealed to make it a fair and even base. But that didn't apply in Joburg or Pretoria. So I was able to fit 6 throttles instead of 1, and a decent set of cams instead of the standard ones which are in, and an extractor manifold, and managed to get very good horsepower out of it. And one day during a Porsche day at Kyalami, a component on the right rear axle on the drive shaft broke, and the right rear wheel dug in, and first of all the car rolled, and then somehow it went, they tell me that it went up in the air, that the tail of the car was as high as the banner that was, or the metal frame that was above the circuit. But what people don't realize is that once the corner of the car is dug in, you get so much sand on the windscreen that you actually don't know where you are. There's about 4 inches of sand, 100 millimeters of sand on the windscreen, and everything goes quiet, and you say, well, it's over. Phew. Then the car hits the ground again, and the noise is unbelievable, like an explosion. And I landed up upside down. My passenger landed up without his boots, bent the door. His seatbelts were still on and tight, and his body somehow got through those, and was about 25 meters away, but only with a broken, is it a femur? The main bone between the hip and the knee. And I was upside down in the car, and I was, as far as I was concerned, I was compos mentis. And the marshals came to the car and asked me, who are you? So I thought, man, damn it, you know who I am, you know the car, what are you asking me stupid questions for? But clearly they were trying to see my conditions. And I told them who I was and what happened, and I told them that a component broke in the right rear. And a lot of people thought, yeah, just making excuses and that. But John Critchfield, Toby's Racing Mechanics, says, I know exactly what it was. And we've had it on a couple of cars. So I was a little bit annoyed that there wasn't a recall, or there wasn't something that told me about that, because I would have changed that. Anyway, so I wasn't going to repair that car, because it always went then live with a rebuilt stigma against it. And I managed to find another one, black. So good news and bad news. Good news because it was black and it was the same, but the bad news is that people might have thought it was a rebuild of the original one. But the original one, a guy in Germany had to have that car because he wanted the chassis number. He used to race those cars, and he had to have the chassis number. So I said, I'll give you the chassis number. He said, no, too many people get an engine from a 917 and they rebuild and they want FIA papers. And somebody gets the bodywork and they rebuild and they want FIA papers. So I have to have that number to be able to categorically say that nobody in the world has got this number. I've got this number. So the wreck, it wasn't as bad as it looked. The engine was out and it was also 25 meters away. But I then found the second body and brought it and transferred that engine in, because it was such a good, well-behaved, powerful engine that was then version 2 that you talked about.
And you still use it on the track around South Africa when the opportunity arises?
Yeah, on fun days, on time trial days, use the car on the track as often as possible. It's so very, very well behaved. And if one is quite honest, you say, listen, the better the car is, the better it makes me look as a driver. Except one day at Swartkorps, I was probably the black car was the quickest of the day, because there wasn't any of these very, very quick cars there. So I then pulled into the pits and a little grandstand above the pits, and the people loved the look of the car and it sounded good and it was going quick, and came down to the pit and saw me get out, and they were expecting a lovely Greek tanned skin with a gold chain, and I took off my helmet and they saw this bloody freak sitting there and they couldn't believe it. Their mouths dropped. And the stupid questions that get asked, they were so shocked. Were you driving this car? What did I just jump into it at the beginning of the pits? And you say yes, and they say, today, now. So, that was quite funny. You talk about, are you still driving it? Yes.
During your association with Porsche cars, you also were involved with a lot of famous racing drivers, famous racing cars, which you built engines for. And the first name that comes to mind is our own South African Formula One world champion, Jody Scheckter. You had some involvement with him at some stage.
Yes, we were racing saloon cars, and Puddles Adler, John Conchi, and I were busy developing Renault R10s to compete with the Gordinis, and in fact landed up producing the Alconi, which Renault took on as a series production car for sale in South Africa, and they got permission from France to do that. But in developing the cars, we saw a loophole in Appendix J in the regulations, which allowed us to supercharge an engine. So we then went around looking for suitable superchargers that we could afford, and one was the pressurizing blower for one of the piston-engined aircraft, passenger aircraft. Another one was a supercharger on a Hanomag diesel, and we opted for that one, and built all the pulleys and the drive and the manifolds and things for that. And Jody Scheckter saw that, and he said he had to have that engine. So in fact we unbolted it and bolted it into his car. So I could actually say that I built an engine for Jody Scheckter, although it was initially for Puddles Adler, and we shifted it into Jody's car.
You were also involved in the South African production car championship with a Fiat that you've built for one of the racing drivers. Was it Basil van Rooyen or
and Dave Charlton?
Yeah.
Yes, there was a series which was called Manufacturers Challenge, and you could take any body of a car and any engine, provided they were from the same family. So you would get, Willie Hepburn choosing a huge engine and sticking it into a Nova or something like that. And Fiat approached us and said, listen, we will give you a 131 Fiat, and we will give you a Ferrari engine. Won't you build us a manufacturer's challenge car? So Basil Van Rooyen, as a driver, picked that up, and he built a De Dion rear axle for it. The 131 the car we brought here, and molded every panel in fiberglass. So the doors, the hood, the boot lid, the whole lot was molded here on the premises. And they sent me over to Italy to have a look at the turbocharged Ferrari engine, the 246 Dino engine, which had been turbocharged, and that was probably my first entree into turbochargers as well. So we then built that car, and it was campaigned by Dave Charlton and Basil Van Rooyen here.
Remarkable. You also had some association with Ilmor Engineering in England, who's known for their Formula One engines.
One of the Meccan students, after having done a year's sabbatical walkabout in Europe, came to me and said, Mr. White, I want you to get me a job with Formula One. So I said to him, maybe my talks were impressive, but I sure gave you the wrong impression, But at that stage, I had the agency for Zytec fuel injection and engine management, and I contacted them, and they said we don't have a job for him, because they were supplying already to March and Tyrrell, but they said let him come over, and we are continuously going to the Formula One teams trying to sell our management system, and he can come with us. And I got a phone call from him, a couple. The first one was, oh, thank you, I've got a meeting with Ilmor. And I thought, who the hell is Ilmor? Anyway, the second one, maybe 2 months later, Ilmor have employed me, I've got a job with Ilmor. So I then found out that Ilmor was the name contracted of Mario Ilian and Paul Morgan. And they were two Cosworth engineers that left Cosworth and started on their own. And at that stage, they'd been building a lot of competition engines for Penske, for NASCAR, and for Indy and things like that. And anyway, that's how Ilmor came about. And I think we've got a photograph of the Christmas card of Ilmor, signed by sold by the two owners. And Paul Morgan had a P-51 Mustang of his own, and unfortunately he killed himself in that aircraft. So that left Mario on his own. And Mario has been out here and had quite a lot of interesting discussions with him. What must carry on is that Mercedes-Benz went to Ilmor, and they went to a chassis manufacturer, and they said, here's a couple of bag of golds each for you to build an Indy car. So Ilmor was to build the engine, and the chassis manufacturer the chassis. It was Dallara or Lola or one of those. I forget which the chassis was. And they said, there are 5 bags of gold. The first one is to accept the project. The next one is when you've got working drawings. The next one is when you've got a running engine. The fourth one will be when you are getting the power that we've all agreed on that you will get. And the fifth one is when on your dynamometer feeding in all of the data logging that we've got from various Indy cars during the race, when you can finish 500 miles at that horsepower. So they got the first bag of gold, the second, the third, but they were continuously having failures. And this engineer that I placed with him, if you like, he phoned me and, "Oh, is your phone tapped? You won't talk to anybody? No, what do you want?" He said, "You told me that Porsche cylinder head studs were made of a material called Delavar, which had the strength of steel but the expansion rate of aluminium, which solved a lot of mechanical problems. What do you want it for?" He said, "No, we are working with such tight tolerances. And why Merck came and thought they had a chance at Indy was because the Americans really wanted a V8 to win, a V8 with a center cam. They wanted that to win Indy, so they increased the capacity of the engine, I believe, from 2.62 liters to something like 3.5, and the boost from 45 inches to 54 inches. I'm out to lunch a bit on those. That's inches of mercury boost. We can convert that to PSI or bar. But increased engine size, increased boost. And they had the camshaft so high and the pushrod so short that they also ran into the problem with the expansion of aluminium components in the head and the block compared with the steel of the pushrod and the rockers and stuff. So I said to him, "Delavar, where do you get it?" I said, "I don't know, but you phone Porsche." Porsche wouldn't tell him. And he looked around and managed to find that Delavar was made in an English company not very far from Brixworth, where they were. Anyway, so they did all of the testing and they got the power they wanted. They could not get 500 miles. It was impossible. They would break the engine, and so much so that they said, "We're not giving you any more engines on the dyno. We'll give you a big electric motor to run your cams and your heads on, and we will give you temperature via hot gas generators. But you can break that. You won't break the electric motor, and we don't keep building your motors." Anyway, so the race day was getting closer, maybe months closer, but that was very close for the people printing programs. And they contacted Ilmor and they said, to Mercedes-Benz, and they said, "Listen, tell us what engine you're building. We need to put it in the program. It's getting urgent now." And the chassis manufacturer was also saying, "Listen, tell us what engine you're going to put in the chassis. We want to know if the engine is load bearing. In other words, can we bolt the monocoque onto the engine, the gearbox to that, and the suspension to that, where the engine then takes suspension loads, or must we take chassis members past the engine to the gearbox and suspension to pick up the loads? We need to know." So they had a big indaba, and knowing that the engine wouldn't do 500 miles, Merck said, "Do it. We've gone so far. You've got 4 bags of gold. We'll do it." So they let it be known, and race day came along. First hour, Merck leading. Second hour, Merck leading. Third hour, Merck leading. The people could not believe it. Merck had taken, again, I'm out to lunch a bit on the number, but like 10,000 caps, the black cap with a star on it. And they were going for $500 a piece. The people had to have it. "I need your cap. I need your cap. I'll pay you for it." And but the Merck and Ilmor were not that over the moon, because they knew they're not going to complete the 500 miles. They did, and they won Indianapolis, and that was Ilmor that you asked me about. So. Quite a story from that point of view.
Brian, to turn to more specific engines, if I remember correctly, you built a 962 IMSA engine also. How did that came about?
Yeah. A 962 IMSA came about when Porsche developed the 956 or 962, which it became. When they built that, they entered it in the American series and IMSA series, and it was so quick that the Americans said, no, you don't understand. We don't allow 4-valve engines here. So Porsche had to revert to a 2-valve engine, and then they went back, still qualifying. You know, we're talking over nearly a year's period of developing and practicing. The Americans said to them, no, you don't understand. We don't allow twin turbochargers here. So they had to change their inlet and exhaust system to run a single turbocharger, and they were still very quick. And they then said to them, you're not allowed to run twin ignition. So they said, that's very easy. We'll just disconnect those plugs. They said, no, you take the coil and you take everything off the car. And it was still quick. And they said, yeah, but you see, you don't understand that we don't allow cars to race where the driver's toes are ahead of the center line of the front wheels. And that was the 956. So the Porsche extended the car, and that became the 962. That's how the 962 came about, where the chassis was extended and the driver's toes were no longer ahead of the center line of the front wheels. And Porsche discovered that, in fact, the 962 handled much better than a 956, so that became the car that they were going to run from then on. But the 962 IMSA engine that I had then was really a modified 935 engine, which was very interesting. But it retained the top fan, which improved the cooling very much, and it had a unique fuel injection system which was retained. And so I managed to get hold of one of those engines which had been disassembled, and I measured it up, assembled it, and in fact I even mounted it in the black car, in the 993 GTR. But somebody then made me an offer I couldn't understand, so that motor had to come out and go into a 917. So the top fan and the power was sort of commensurate with what those cars should be. So I never ran it in the black car.
Just to come back to the 962, 956, 962 combination, will you say that was the most successful Le Mans car ever built?
Yeah, by a long way. I mean, you've got 18 wins. There were a remarkable number of wins by Ford. When they showed a series a little while ago on ignition, I never really realized that Ford had won so many in a row. I remembered Bentley in the early days, and I remember Ferrari. So one would say the 18 wins, that was by 2016, I think that was their 18th win. That was absolutely, totally remarkable, thinking that other people, particularly, like Ford and that, had only won 1 or 2 or 3 in a row. But that 962, 956 was absolutely remarkable. It was incredible.
Brian, you were also involved in creating replica cars, and I remember there's photos of the 935 replica which you were part of building for Johan van Veerlen.
Yes, that wasn't a 935. It was. We were trying to copy what they called the baby, and that was a 1.5 liter single turbocharged car. And what happened was that Ford And BMW said to Porsche at one stage, you racing in the classes where it's easy, where you're running the 962s and the 935s. So Porsche got annoyed, and they said, all right, they looked at the rules, and they said, if we build a 2.1 litre with the multiplication factor of, I think, 1.4 for size, we can enter into that series as well. So they built that car, and they blew off Ford and BMW, and they said, okay, and then they left the series. So there was one of those cars in the museum at Sinsheim, and Ziggy had very, very good access to Sinsheim because he used to let his cars be shown there to attract people. And a lot of these dinky cars that I've got here came from Sinsheim Museum because Ziggy used to go there and say, oh, Brian, would you like that one? Would you like that one? That one? So those dinkies are from him. And they then allowed us with Johan to step over the little white poles onto the white stones and put a ruler or something on the back wing and take photographs so that you could then scale it and scale the sizes and see what it was. So we tried to build that as accurately as we could from the inlet manifold side, the intercooler side, the turbocharger side. What we did was we crooked a little bit, and instead of using a 2.1 engine, we used a 3.3. So that gave us a lot of advantage, and he did some very, very good times with that car. So yeah, the Martini car, and we've got some incredible pictures of that car as well.
Brian, you were very much closely associated with a particular 956, which changed hands from Ziggy Brunn to Frans Pretorius. Yes. And that's actually how you and I met when you were a special advisor when we ran that car for France.
Yeah, because we had an altitude problem on the car, and we had to get it ideally suited for a much shorter circuit, obviously than Le Mans, and get the gearing right and the tuning for the altitude right, and various little problems that would pop up from time to time. So.
Now to the serious stuff, Brian. Hans Mesker, your association with him, and what a remarkable man.
I think, I would like to call him the best automotive engineer ever in history. That's my personal point of view, and I think a lot of people would in fact agree with that. But I wanted to buy an engine from Porsche, and they in fact supplied me one, which was in a wooden crate, maybe a cubic meter or something like that, with fragile and this way up. And I went to collect it in Durban, and it was upside down. But Porsche had realized these things happen, so they filled it with these plastic yellow chips, which stopped it being damaged altogether. And when I opened the motor here, I got it here, opened it, and I saw written on the engine was Alba. And I thought, what is Alba? Does that mean a white snowy mountain, or what does it mean? So I got hold of Weissach, and I said, what is this Alba? And they said, no, that's the name of a Meister mechanic who works in the racing division, and he in fact assembled that motor for you. So I said, well, the next time I'm going to Germany, I'm certainly going to look up Alba. But so I went to Weissach. Weissach you could go to quite happily in those days. You can't go there anymore, mainly because you see things that you shouldn't see. Like, for instance, the flight deck of, I think what's the latest Airbus?
A380.
Yes, A380 or something. You see the flight deck there, and you see the cylinder head of one of the Harley Davidsons, and I forget what they call that, but they designed the head.
Rod.
The what?
I think the street rod or the night rod, the Harley Davidson.
Something like that. So you would see those things, and a particular development for Chrysler they would be. Anyway, in those days you could go in, and they took me to Alba, and he couldn't speak English at all. So he said, "Komm mit mir nach mein Freund, Herr Metzger." So I thought, who's Metzger? You know, like I didn't know who Ilmor was. I didn't know who Metzger was. And I discovered this incredible engineer, unbelievable. And we went up to his office, and he was on control of the whole development of the Flat 12 917, the 911 engine. It was just unbelievable. And they were working on drawing boards in those days, maybe 2 meters by a meter drawing boards with set squares and stuff. You know, the solid modeling and that wasn't in yet. And he used to clear his desk, and Jeannie and I used to sit down there, and he would not say, "I'm busy" or "I have to do something," until every question had been asked. An unbelievable gentleman. And I remember really only asking one question which he couldn't answer, and that was, how do you fill a 911 fuel tank properly? Was is? And I said, well, you've got a moat around there that the spare wheel fits into, which makes a dome in the middle. Now, once you've emptied that dome and you try to fill it again with fuel, that dome will trap air underneath it as if it was a boat that had turned upside down. So he immediately got onto his fueling man and called him up and said, how do you fill that fully? And they thought about it. They said, no, we can't. So I didn't keep the serviettes and the bits of paper, but there we are designing how a little pipe the size of a brake line could go from the filler side of things up into the top of that dome, and the air could escape out of that, and then you could fill it completely. But that would only work once, because then the little pipe would be full. So then we're designing and putting a bulb on it that the owner or somebody could puff twice and get the air, the fuel out of that, and then that could let the air go out again. And I mean, such a silly little thing to be looking at, but I just wish in his handwriting I've kept those particular bits of drawing. But I have got his handwriting and his comments on a lot of turbocharger compressor maps that were used on a lot of the race cars. So that I've got of his, but remarkable. And he then, when we, what he did say was, no, we must go to the casino now. So, what's that? But the lunch area at Weissach, they called the casino. And of course, Jeannie and I are walking with this Sir Hans Metzger into the lunch area, and they thought that we must have been super high individuals from Chrysler or American Racing or something like that. But he used to take us to lunch there, and that was incredible in the casino.
You still have contact with him these days?
Every year, and we're talking from maybe 84, somewhere around there, a Christmas card from him. And yeah, you know, obviously retired. And one of the last conversations I had with him was when the latest Formula One regs came out. He said no, he wasn't as crude as saying I'm being paid nicely for, but he was giving lectures to universities because of the similarity to the Formula One engine, because the capacity is nearly the same and the number of cylinders is nearly the same, the V turbocharged, and all of the problems that he experienced with the Porsche Formula One engine, and the solutions he could then expose to the young engineers to see what the latest engineers would have to put up with, you know, Ferrari and Mercedes and all the other designers.